living prophecy, no question in my mind. We are living Bible prophecy. A man by the name of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you'd think, I don't know that he's any kin, but he says that almost no one understands what's at stake. He said, no one understands what's at stake. Pharma has 80 COVID vaccines in development, 80 of them. But Bill Gates and Fauci pushed Moderna's Frankenstein jab to the front of the line. What are you talking about, preacher? Scientists and ethicists are sounding alarms. The vaccine uses a new, untested, and very controversial experimental RNA technology. Stop for a moment. DNA is the code that is in your body. That code is passed from generation to generation, but it's simply code. It's like an encyclopedia. It's like a book of knowledge. All this information, RNA reads it, and RNA takes what it reads and through its own process disseminates it into the body. So here we go. It tells us that the vaccine uses a new, untested, and very controversial experimental RNA technology that Gates has backed for over a decade. If instead of injecting an antigen and adjuvant as with traditional vaccines, Moderna plugs a small piece of coronavirus genetic code into human cells, altering DNA throughout the human body and reprogramming our cells to produce antibodies to fight the virus. mRNA vaccines are a form of genetic engineering called germline gene editing. Moderna's genetic alterations are passed down to future generations. Here's a doctor. Her name is Dr. Carrie Matdej. She is an osteopathic trained internal medicine physician, and she's talking about genetically modified humans. 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 She says the so-called COVID vaccines deploy recombinant DNA, RNA technology that rewrites the genetic code, much as Monsanto, for example, rewrites the genetic code of tomato and other seeds. Genetically modified organisms can be patented and owned. Monsanto owns the GMO seeds. Once DNA vaccines are used on humans, and it has never been done before, humans could possibly be owned as well. We could be, in theory, be patented. None of this has been discussed at length, and very little about this is publicly known. Scientists do not know how this affects our DNA. Recombinant RNA and DNA technology will, argues Matdej, cause permanent and unknown genetic changes in a person's body. Digest that for a moment, because this is coming down the road. What happens to you in this generation, according to these people, will be passed on from generation to generation. You can mess with DNA. You can get into problems with this. And there's a thing called a teratoma. I mentioned to you the other day. What is that? That is a cell that shows up where it's not supposed to show up. For example, a nose can grow on your arm. Eyeballs, or something that is hideous in appearance, can grow in parts of your body. They're not supposed to be there. When you start messing with DNA, you are messing with the very program of life. There's only one, glory to God. There's just one that can make DNA. A man is a fool to think that something so complicated could evolve. That could only come from the hand of an almighty eternal God. You were programmed to be who you are and what you are. Before the foundation of the world, God made man in his mind to bring him forth when he created him from the dust of the ground.
This is where an RNA vaccine comes in.
And nobody's talking about it. The media's not talking about it.
Which becomes possible when you have the virus's genetic sequence.
Then you have to ask yourself, is why are they not covering something so critical as what I discussed? Basically, we have our genetic code that's encased in this double helix strand, what we call the DNA. And then there's another component that helps to rewrite that DNA called RNA. Viruses are fragments of this genetic code of DNA and RNA. These DNA and RNA fragments get back into the cell, get incorporated within our DNA structure, and rewrite certain parts of the DNA in order to help us adapt to our environment and to adjust to environmental triggers. Now, viruses exist inside our cells, and if it wasn't for viruses, the human system would no longer have survived the planet, because viruses are how we evolve. Because viruses, these DNA and RNA fragments, get back into the cell, get incorporated within our DNA structure, and rewrite certain parts of the DNA in order to help us adapt to our environment and to adjust to environmental triggers. All right?
This is where an RNA vaccine comes in, which becomes possible when you have the virus's genetic sequence and you know which genes code for which protein.
Making your cell do the work of creating this viral protein that is going to be recognized by your immune system and trigger the development of these antibodies.
Now, there's never been an RNA vaccine ever developed. What Moderna is planning on doing is creating this RNA vaccine. This is a company that's never put a vaccine out first. Second, they have never made any product that's been consumed by humans or utilized by humans. Third, they have bypassed all animal testing. RNA vaccine, which will actually introduce RNA fragments into our system. And what that's going to do is it's going to get incorporated inside our DNA and literally rewrite our DNA. It will rewrite our human code, our genetic code. This is basically taking the human system and making it into something else. This is going to generationally be so catastrophic because we have no idea what the implications are. We are talking about rewriting the human genome. Human genetic code will be rewritten by this vaccine, because once it goes in there, it's not like just introducing X or Y or Z. It's introducing in something that is going to start replicating, and it's going to be like a chain reaction. It's going to be like a domino reaction, and it's going to start causing a rewriting of the genetic code within our system. It is going to adulterate and mutate our DNA so that we are not even human anymore. When I say that, I'm not saying it metaphorically. I'm talking about generationally. That's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to start changing how our systems evolve.
Again, my name is Dr. Carrie Motti, or Carrie, and I'm an internal medicine physician, osteopathic trained. Also important to know that DNA is similar to a computer code or a binary code. So if you're familiar with those, where it takes a small change in the pattern or code and will have a very grand effect. So you can insert a genome or gene, into the genome, so you can put something extra in there. You can take something out so that it's missing one. You can translocate, meaning you take one part of the genome and put it into another area and flip-flop them. Or you can take another synthetic or from another organism, a genome, in and cut out part of the genome of the human and insert that other genome in there. When you're doing this, you are rewriting your genetic code. You are writing your software program. And how much change of that code would it take to then be considered not human? An interesting point is that we cannot patent anything natural or from nature. But we can patent something that's been created, modified, or engineered. A good example is Monsanto. It can genetically modify the seeds, therefore it's created something a little different. You may see the corn or the tomato or whatever in the grocery store and it looks the same as a wild type, but it's not. They changed something. So on the outside it looked the same, but on the inside it's not. So therefore they own those seeds. Now, if it's a wild type, one that just grows from nature, they cannot patent that. They can't own that, okay? So, translate that or transpose that onto a human cell line or a human. That could potentially mean that we could be patented, or human cell lines could be patented. And if it's patented, it has to have owners. So I think you might see where I'm going with this. This is not a sci-fi movie or a future event. This is right now, today. This is called recombinant DNA and recombinant RNA technology, and this is what is proposed for COVID-19 vaccine. The coronavirus COVID-19 vaccines are designed to make us into genetically modified organisms. That is the same lingo and terminology used for Monsanto seeds. Okay? So the front runners for this recombinant DNA technology are Inovio, which is backed by the Gates Foundation, GlaxoSmithKline, and Sanofi. Also, Moderna is in there too now, but and that's also a Gates-backed foundation. I will add that this type of DNA vaccine has never been used on humans before. Let me repeat that. Please understand, this has never, ever been used on humans before. Never. They are now proposing to take something we've never used and to inject it into everyone. Vaccine trials are being fast-tracked at a level and a rate that I have never seen in my life, nor did I ever expect to see this. They are skipping over the animal trials, going directly to human trials. They are not using good scientific methodology at all. They have no randomized, placebo-controlled trials for any vaccine, which is the gold standard for any therapy to be approved by the FDA. They're not following any sound scientific protocol to make sure this is safe for us, to make sure it would work for us, to know anything about it, and they want to inject it into everybody. In 2010, DARPA, which is the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, military agency, started focusing on DNA and RNA vaccines. And they had a synthetic DNA vaccine that could be delivered via non-invasive electroporation, which is using kind of a sticker with microneedles in it on your skin. You can barely feel it go in there. And in their words, in quotations, it is to enhance and subvert, end of quotations, humans at a genetic level. This is around the same year Bill Gates heavily started to fund the DNA RNA vaccines with the companies mentioned before. In 2012, DARPA acknowledges a brain-machine interface. That is, AI, artificial intelligence, and the human brain will form a neural network and therefore have the ability to communicate by thought alone or being influenced or controlled remotely. Okay. So this is the idea. You go into maybe your smart home, think about turning on the air conditioner, the fan, your favorite program, have the stove start cooking something, who knows what, and it happens because it's Wi-Fi. That sounds cool, right? But think about that. If it's going one way, it's coming back another way. What if the smart home can give you messages too? This all ties in together, so bear with me. So another DARPA program around that time is Next Gen Non-Surgical Nanotechnology N3 program. And it involves non-invasive or minimally invasive brain-computer interfaces to read and write directly onto your brain. Do you understand what this means?
This is about a fight for the human species, a fight for our survival on this planet. Because if this RNA vaccine is allowed to come into our systems, we will not be the same. Humans will not be the same. Our genetic code will be altered forever.
But what's really going on with these vaccines is never what they tell you. And this new DNA vaccine that the 4 companies he's got is not like traditional vaccines. It goes in and reprograms the nuclei of your cells.
And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, "Go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth." And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image.